Hey everyone, welcome back to the advanced section of CSS now. We're going to start with that. And in the last course, in the HTML CSS basics one, we discussed about CSS selectors, how you can select elements, how you can style them with certain properties. In this one, let's just go ahead and start with some advanced things. The first one being the specificity of a CSS selector. Let's just go ahead and create a style here, color red. And if we go to like the HTML document, you're going to see that we already have a p tag here and the style sheet link. So that's fine. Now in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and create another style. Let's say color blue in this case. So you can see now it applied color blue, right? Earlier it was color red. So how does CSS determine what to do? Is it like, random? Is it like, what is the order? So the first thing you have to remember is that every selector you use in CSS has you can think of as a sort of a score, right? And every selector having a particular score, if that score is more than a competing selector for that particular element, then that style would be applied. For example, I'm going to leave this example for now. We're going to come to this later on. For example, let's just throw in a div tag now, and I'm going to say p inside a div, right? Now we can see both of them are blue at the moment, but the moment I change this to div p, you're going to see the first one right here turns actually red, right? Even though we defined it above, and it's not like, it's not sort of overridden by blue, which happened before, right? So what's happening here? What's happening? Let me just go ahead and actually write a p color red here as well, just to make things clear, right? So earlier we had this, now we had this whole thing, but now this works for the div tag. So the specificity of this selector right here, let's just calculate that. I'm gonna have a comment specificity like this, and the specificity for this selector is 2. Why? Because it's 1 plus 1. I'm gonna give it like this. Every selector, every HTML element as a tag name, every tag name rather, has selector 1, has a specificity of 1. You can even see this thing in the sort of sort of information. This right here, you can see if I hover over this has just a specificity of 1. This right here has a specificity of 2. So obviously this has more specificity than this one. That's why this style gets applied for the matching element, that is the p tag inside div. Now, what about, let's say if I had an ID of p tag like this. Now if I go ahead and give an ID of p tag and then say color green, what's going to happen? You can see it turns green, right? Even though we have div p of red. And if you hover over this, you can see it has a specificity of 100. So what's happening here is, you can think of, if you have an ID, then the specificity score of an ID is 100, right? So the specificity score of this thing right here is 2, whereas for ID it is 100, right? So it's a massive jump in the specificity. So specificity just means that, hey, how specific you are with your selector. And the reason the IDs have a specific score of 100 is because there could be only one single ID on the whole page, right? So that means you're super specific on what element you're targeting. So you should always have a single ID on a specific page. That's how the semantics are laid down and the workings are laid down. And if you do not do, bad things would happen. But anyway, you can see it has a very high specificity. So yeah, that's basically one thing. First of all, the next thing is you can also have a class name, right? So if I have not really an ID, but a class of p tag, and if I go ahead and rename this like this, you're gonna see the specific score of this right here is 10, right? And we have a p tag class, and let's see, we probably again had a little bit of caching issue. I don't know. Yep, looks like caching issue. So let's just go ahead and open this in a new tab rather. And now you can see that it's actually green because, you know, obviously this has a specific score of 10 and that specific score is still 2. So this is going to win, right? So there's that. Yeah, so that's one thing. Another thing is that if you try to do something magical like ID of p tag as well, and if you try to chain these two, you can do that in CSS, that an ID of p tag and no space. Remember, no space, because if you give a space, that means that it is looking for that children inside the ID p tag. So right here, you can see that this has a specificity score of 110. Just like you can see, the 100 comes from the ID and the 10 comes from the class name. So there's that, right? So yeah, that's its specific score. Again, much larger than 2. So you're gonna win. Now, what you can do is probably nest more selectors. For example, if you're competing between these two elements, the way you can make this particular element win over everyone else is probably by throwing in more selectors like this, right? So you can now see the P inside div has a color of blue instead of red. So if you ever see that there are styles conflicting, that means you are applying something but something else is being shown, the first thing you should go ahead and open that in the browser. Obviously, open your console. We're gonna have a dedicated console course on CodeDam, but don't worry about this. Just open that console, go to that element inside this elements tag. For example, this is the element I'm targeting inside the div tag. And you can see right here, we see a style which is crossed. So if your style is crossed, that probably means that another super style is overriding it, right? And you would probably be able to see it just above that. So if I go ahead and remove this, you can see if the style was not present, then that would work. But if you if you see their style is crossed, that means some other style specificity is more than this one. That's why it is overriding it. Right, so that's a little bit course on specificity. Coming to our first problem, that is, if you have a conflicting score of specificity, the style which is applied is the style which comes later, right? So this style comes later, that is why it is applied. If you just cut and paste this one, this would be applied, right? It's not a big deal. So that's how it all works. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it, how this specificity thing works in a nutshell. So yeah, that's it for this video. I'm going to see you in the next one discussing more concepts about CSS.